Lots of familiar faces here. Great to meet all of you. My name is Nicole Eiffel. I'm Deputy Director of our U.S. Program Data Strategy team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I have the pleasure of moderating this amazing panel of fellow philanthropic funders. Before I introduce them, I just had a few words of my own to say. First and foremost, loved also Robert's comment earlier today about the family reunion feel and like everybody's doing the same thing. And I'm always confused because apparently only 2% of people care about data, and that doesn't make sense to me because it's my life. So everyone I talk to is all about the data, so which he would say is a biased sample, as many of you would understand too. So I'm glad to be among friends. I'm also glad that this is the third annual Coleridge Convening. The foundation, the Gates Foundation in this case, has been a longtime supporter of the work, a longtime supporter of the Administrative Data Research Facility, and it's been great to move from a virtual-only environment of launching something so incredibly new in the middle of a pandemic and actually being able to come together all in one room and really start to think about the ways that we're providing this data to the field, both practitioners, policymakers, and as you'll hear from our philanthropic audiences, really thinking about Black, Latino students, learners from low-income backgrounds, and other populations that are critical if we're going to actually meet the needs and the gaps in the field on coverage in the job market. So with that, I just want to introduce our 5 panelists here. I have Larry Jackson, Senior Director of Opportunity at Walmart.org, Stephen Murray, President and CEO of Strata Education Foundation, Bridget Cherry, consultant with Walton Family Foundation, Bethany Miller, Director of Learning and Impact at Ascendium Education Philanthropy, and last but not least, Chris Mullen at Director, and I've lost him in my list here, Strategy Director of Data and Measurement at Lumina Foundation. So with that in mind, I'm going to start with some warm-up questions here, maybe some softballs. I did prep them, so hopefully they're easy. But I really encourage all of you to add questions to the chat. John will be sending them my way. And after a few warm-ups from me, we'll see if we can bring some of those to bear on the panel today. So first up here, I'm really curious about why certain philanthropic organizations invest in data infrastructure. Many of you know that the Gates Foundation has been investing in this non-exciting topic for many, many years, and I'm so excited to have such a crowded panel of folks that are also starting to see the importance of this work. And so I thought as a first question, it would be great to understand, why are they in this? What are they seeing? What are we looking for in the future? And so with that, I want to turn it over to Bridget to reflect on Walton Family Foundation's approach to why your organization invests in data infrastructure.
Thanks, Nicole. Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess. Good afternoon, everybody. So at Walton, we see that there's been a lot of innovation in other sectors that have unlocked new ways that data can support learning and generate evidence and facilitate decision-making. But we also see significant gaps in the field on data infrastructure, especially in the education space. So with our North Star of economic mobility, one of the challenges that we're facing is that we have a difficult time understanding what is actually impacting economic mobility. So we are focused on data infrastructure investments that will help us understand drivers of economic mobility and help people at all levels, from policymakers to researchers to families, understand learners on that whole continuum of early childhood to workforce.
Bethany, you want to go next?
Good afternoon. Did that work? Nicole did coach us to be brief, so we will try to stick with that. You're going to find a lot of themes across all of our remarks, but similar to our friends at Walton, Ascendium really is focused on upward mobility as well, and I'd say we have this big sort of equity-focused goal around supporting more low-income learners to leverage post-secondary education and workforce training to achieve that upward mobility. And as I stepped back from this, I imagine actually that's probably something a lot of us share, because that sounds very similar to the American dream. This idea that you can come from nothing and find success in this country has been a reoccurring sort of aspiration we've had, though we know that aspiration hasn't been always true for all populations in our country. So not only all students who come from low-income backgrounds, but also students who come from racialized groups. And so really thinking about how do we deliver better on that American dream for more individuals sort of motivates us at Ascendium and motivates us to want to change our systems so that we're not just helping the few who manage to get through the gauntlet of post-secondary education and workforce training, but actually help the many. And so as we think about having a systems change orientation, we know that data is essential to understanding what our system is currently doing and not doing. And we know that data is essential to equipping actual actors, the policymakers, the practitioners, the families and students in our system to actually change that system so that it serves all of us better. So really excited about this conversation and to go deeper on some of those big ideas.
Chris?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Hello to my friends in the back. Susan Lunsberry, good to see you from the SRG Data Exchange. I'm Chris Mullen. I'm from Lumina Foundation. And Lumina Foundation in 2008 set forward an ambitious, data-driven, time-limited goal. 60% of Americans have a quality credential by 2025. That has resulted in us working to try and define things ever since then. While that number, degrees and higher, we use the American Community Survey, which is an important part of our national data infrastructure. We've also worked really hard to advance the conversation around non-degree credentials, including certificates and certifications. And so everything we do has a data focus, whether it be elevating the idea of competency-based education, we have to measure it, right? Everything that we're pushing and moving forward is either set in a context and foundation to advance measurement, or, can you speak louder? I'm sorry. I'll start again, because it was good, right? The people up front, that was a good answer?
We got time. Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's start at the beginning. Seneca said time is valuable. Lumina has set an audacious goal, a time-limited goal of 60% of educational attainment by 2025, and that has informed all of our work, even our programmatic work. We're trying to advance understanding in data. Again, we use ACS for degrees or higher. I've talked to many of you in states about your goals. 48 states have set their own attainment goals as a result. And also moving the needle forward on things such as certificates and certifications, and really working hard to improve the national data infrastructure and state data infrastructures to be able to measure credentials of value. So for that reason and many other, data is very important.
I love my data wonks up here. Larry, you want to talk a little bit about Walmart.org's vision for data infrastructure?
Yes, thank you, Nicole, and thank you all for inviting us. At Walmart and the Walmart Foundation, we really are focused on accelerating opportunity and economic mobility for frontline retail workers at Walmart and beyond. That's really one of the cool things about this job is that we're really focused on frontline retail workers, but frontline retail workers are analogous to a lot of wage workers in general. And the whole push around opportunity and economic mobility, we believe that starts with a skills-based system. Hiring based on the skills that you have, not where you went to school or what type of social network that you have. While those things are important, we believe that if you have the skills to do the job, you should have an opportunity to get the job. And so in order for us to do that, it really needs to start with data. We need to know the skills that you have, and we need to be able to have a system and society in which those skills are valued, they're seen, they're accepted, regardless of where you got them from. Because people get skills and knowledge and abilities and experience through multiple paths, right? And so everything that we do in trying to put forth a skills-based society to help facilitate mobility and opportunity for a lot of folks, it just comes down to understanding the skills that people have, having that captured, and having a system and a society in which those skills are seen, and those skills become a currency for people to move into different positions, whether that be in work or in academia. And so really excited to be here and appreciate all the work that everyone's doing to support that effort.
Stephen?
Sure. So Strata is a little bit new to the data space. We, like the others on the team here, are focused on strengthening a link between education and opportunity. We see the value of data infrastructure really is ubiquitous across this whole space. Really everything that we hope to achieve will be enabled by this work. We think about helping people to make better informed choices about post-secondary education, not just individuals, but also institutions and policymakers and employers. We also think about the power of data to help us understand what's really happening between these education and labor market linkages, where the gaps are, where we have surpluses, where there are deficits, and most importantly, how we can help more people to get to a better place. So we're excited to be joining the other folks up here and getting into this space in a big way.
I love it. And I'll note that this panel, in part because of our support of the Democratizing Our Data Challenge, is very much focused on that education to workforce piece. At the same time, at least at the Gates Foundation and maybe some of the others, we continue to see how education outcomes and information is inextricably linked with access to benefits. So thinking about some of the work of the TANF Data Collaborative and other projects that the Coleridge Initiative supports are also to us just not, they shouldn't be considered disconnected from the education conversation, because if you are qualified or entitled to certain benefits and you're in a post-secondary education institution, that is going to make it a lot easier for you to complete your coursework, to focus on your coursework, to reduce your work time to part-time. And if we aren't thinking about how our data extend beyond individual agencies and departments, we're gonna be doing a disservice to our students. So just wanted to flag a little bit about what I know can be some broader interests and are represented by others in the room here. With that, I'm gonna go to our next question, because one of the things I was just flagging was there's lots of data, agencies out there linking. We saw so much excitement. Well, sorry, maybe I was the only one excited this morning. But I mean, I had already heard about Robert's reflection on his paper with his co-authors, the 21st Century Data Infrastructure Vision. It really aligns very strongly with the way that we think about information at the Gates Foundation and how to ensure that it's accessible. But one thing that too often we hear from public institutions or agencies like yourselves are that we are data rich but information poor, right? So we're increasing all of these linkages. We're increasing the theoretical approach or opportunity to answer research questions. But what actually do we need in order to ensure that that as a aspiration is lending itself to improvements in the field? So I'd like to ask my colleagues here, where do you see the most pressing gap in filling that data-rich, information-poor scenario? Or what need in the field do you see when it comes to ensuring that decision-making, especially amongst policymakers, is data-informed? And for this, I am going to ask Larry to jump in first.
Thank you. One of the things at Walmart that we're thinking about constantly, and one of the things that we speak about when it comes to employer practices and the way that localities work, state agencies work, is really around data transparency and being able to capture the skills and credentials that people have and for those systems to communicate with one another. And really for us, we believe that that's a key to career navigation, advancement, and that's not only good for the individual workers or learners, right, but that's also good for business, that's good for society. When people can invest in themselves and they have those skills recognized and accepted across systems, that allows them to see the opportunities that are ahead, that allows them to achieve mobility, to stay in with certain employers, for those employers to then realize the gains and benefits from the workers staying there, right? And not have to have additional costs with like turnover and all of these things that impact the way businesses work and therefore impact society. And so for us, we think that creating the systems in which that data is transparent and can communicate across systems is really, really key to ultimately having thriving businesses, which create thriving communities, and that's why we think it's so important.
That's great. I'm curious, Bethany, what's your perspective from Ascendium when we think about the pressing gap in the field around data and information?
So in my role, I tend to really interact with a lot of real people, real decision makers facing real decisions and having real questions about the higher ed institutions that they manage, the programs that they're operating, or pathways that they're trying to create in our state. And so I just wanted to share two anecdotes of questions that have crossed my desk in just the last week that I think the kind of data linkages and partnerships you all are creating would help us answer more efficiently in the future. So one, this week, or it was actually last week, but be a little broad, was do apprentices who are educated at our public 2-year institutions secure good jobs in the Midwest? We don't quite know that yet. And ideally, the person I was talking to wanted to know the answer to that, not just because they wanted that descriptive statistics, but they wanted to know it because they said, if not, how can we improve our apprenticeship pathways? How could we be engaging employers differently to ensure that there is a good job at the end of this pathway for those individuals? And not only that, but how do we look at those outcomes and disaggregate them by gender, by race, by other characteristics to ensure that we're actually creating a state economy that's equitable in which all people can sort of really thrive. The other example I'll lift up is more at the institutional level. So I was talking to an institutional leader who was talking about really wanting to incorporate more work-based learning into their upper division courses, and curious to know to what extent were students who were getting that exposure to some private companies in their community actually going on to get employment in their communities after graduation. They wanted to know, what did that look like? Not just to know, but actually to help refine and improve the work-based learning opportunities that they were giving their students at their institution. So really thinking about how do we get this data in the hands of, yes, policymakers, but also practitioners, so that they can improve the kind of services that are being offered to learners, so ultimately those learner outcomes can improve. That's the kind of systems change we're hoping to help facilitate and promote.
I love it. Systems change is always a big thing for us. We're trying to figure out fundamentally what changes we need from the system. I'd love, Stephen, for you to jump in a little bit and riff on that, given the new emerging strategy that you're establishing at Strata.
Sure. So I guess I'll talk about it from two dimensions. One is a couple of the biggest or most pressing data gaps that we see, and then there's sort of a human capital side to it as well. On the data gaps front, we would love to see every state add title/occupation to the UI wage records, which I think would be transformational in driving our understanding of not only initial occupations, but occupational trajectories, supply-demand analysis, all kinds of really helpful insights that could come out of that. That's going to be one of our top priorities of our data work at Strata. I think it's something I believe, Nicole, you've championed as well. The other big gap that we see is, there's several, of course, but the other one I'll mention is non-degree credentials, non-degree credential outcomes, right, which is largely a black box, I think, right now. What data is available is mostly survey data with relatively low accuracy and comprehensiveness. If we see short-term Pell, that may change, but it may not change initially until they see a lot of bad outcomes come out of that. On the human capital front, what I find really interesting is that while most states have now connected their, let's say, their post-secondary education records with their wage records, I would also say that most of them have not actually built the human capital talent on the other end to produce usable insights from that data. Some places are doing some interesting work. I think what Kentucky is doing with KY Stats, I think is pretty interesting, pretty compelling. Virginia has a pretty ambitious plan with the Virginia Office of Education Economics, but I do think in general, the sort of human capital side of that, to me, is a big, big gap in the country, where we spent many millions of dollars kind of connecting the systems, not as much money into people that are really labor market experts that can produce actionable insights out of that data.
That's one of the reasons that I love the Coleridge model, right? We've got a lot of scenarios where you're putting data out there or you're storing it in some sort of secure location, but you're not providing the corresponding training, whether in this case data science and aligned with a research agenda, to actually move forward with that information. It becomes kind of like on an island of like, well, we have this. And I think it was Amy, apologies if I misattribute the comment around data mausoleums, right? Like these just, it was such a great visual to me of just this place where the data sits and nobody touches it, right? And I do think that this capacity piece is a huge part of it, because if we don't have sufficient expertise in the field to use the data to ask additional questions, and if we're not trying to figure out how to make that an interconnected, networked approach, like the data collaboratives that many of you heard about yesterday, we run the risk of one individual having deep expertise and knowledge, and then when they leave, what do we have for our system, right? And so I really love the idea here that you've already been digging into this capacity piece, We know that there's the Harvard SDP Fellows Program. I'd love to hear others on the panel if you have ways that you're thinking about addressing human capacity in your strategies.
Sure. This is on now, right? All right.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Is it?
I need a competency in microphone usage. So this is a good question. And when I came to Illumina about 2 years ago, I got a lot of ideas about data tools, right? And I worked in 3 different state systems, oversaw longitudinal data systems. So I've been in that world. And at one time I had a chance to build one. And I said, who are we building this for? And nobody could answer the question, right? Because what a single mother who wants to actually work as an early childhood elementary teacher during the day and have dinner with her family needs is very different than what my legislature needed or what the governor needed, right? And so first of all, when we build tools and we talk about using data, first identify audience and primary audience. Yes, everybody can use it, but who is this really for? Because in K-12, when you're retained, that means you're held back. In higher ed, it means the institution's doing a good job. You tell a poor person that's looking at a data tool that the institution has a high retention rate, and they're not going to go because they think they're going to get held back. We've got to really think about the vocabulary and the words we use and the audiences that we engage with, one. And then related to that, how I think about it is there are 3 reasons for consumer information, right? You probably know this. I'm just going to say it again because it helps me keep it forefront of my brain. Number 1 is a warning. So you think about the Surgeon General warning on a pack of cigarettes. These things will do you harm. Enjoy them if you'd like, right? You might see it on a vodka bottle or other places too. There are warnings that are attributed to consumer products. The second is for comparison purposes. So you think about the grocery store, you pick up a box of cereal, you pick up another box of cereal, you're like, this has a lot of sugar, this has less sugar, but it doesn't taste as good, I'm taking the sugar box. But at least you make an informed decision about what you're doing by using these comparison opportunities. The third is for equality, which is this ubiquitous thing. But the best example is Consumer Reports, right? They have a set of criteria. You looked up your used car. You say, is it reliable? Does it break down? Does the engine work? Do the tires last long? All those things. And from there, you make the most informed choice and decision based upon the information available to you. So as we think about sharing information out, it's not only answering the questions, it's who's the audience, and what's the intended purpose of the way that we're using this data and information to inform that audience. And so that's how I think about human capital more and more is the tactical application of it. And work we're trying to do, I'm in charge of Stronger Nation, our website. We've worked very hard to make it intuitive. We had a little insights tab that pops out and actually identifies the 3 or 4 stories that somebody might want to know without having to dig through the whole tool. So it's an ongoing process for all of us involved in the data world. But I think it's really important to think about who the user is and how do you best equip the user to benefit from the information you spend so much time putting together.
I think that's great. I love those analogies or metaphors or whatever they are. I kind of fail at that part.
It's from a 1976 New Direction in Higher Education article when they were creating hedges, which became iPads. That's where those 3 things came from.
Look at that. We've got a source here that we'll need to send around to folks who are interested in digging that deep on, data sources. I want to turn it over to Larry because you are one of our panelists that's closest to wage workers. You were talking about the retail workers and what Walmart represents. When you think about what consumers need or how this information needs to get to them, what are ideas that you're thinking about or what around what Chris said resonates with you as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I was just riffing in my head while Chris was talking. So going back to the notion of creating opportunity and mobility pathways for retail workers, one of the keys to that, we believe, is transparent and clear learning paths. When you go through a 2-year, 4-year degree institution, what you're sort of signing up for is a DNA of learning objectives at the course level that roll up into a program, right? And there's an instructional system designer, there's curriculum development designers, there are all of these folks that are building that pathway out for you. Well, what if you don't go to a 2-year, 4-year degree program? We need individuals to be able to create their own learning paths that at the end of those learning paths, they create value for themselves and for business. right? And in order to do that, right, people need to be able to say what a 101 is, what a 201 is, what a 301 is, what their interests are. And they also need to understand, where are they now? What skills, what interests, what information, what knowledge do they have right now? And so when you think about that gap, that's one of the ways in which we look at building capacity for people. People having the ability to map out their own paths, for them to see the skills, the knowledge that they have right now, and be able to know how to get from that 101 to a 201, and understand how to move and go across those gaps. And so, a lot of that, right, starts with data. We need a system in place that says, you have this skill, you have this information, and that information equals this. You want to get here, and you need this information to get here. And so we need a system in which they can manage their own skills, but then also the folks that they're talking with, whether it be academic institutions, whether it be employers, right, that they also can say, because you were here, you already have these skills, you have this information, and we're adding that to your ability to manage your own information and your own data. And that's how you get to a more equitable and just society in which everyone has opportunity to really experience to experience achievement and opportunity.
That's one of the reasons I found that Indiana project earlier has been really exciting to me. I mean, first off, it's an application of the credential transparency descriptor language, which has been really up in the weeds for folks, for years. And I think it's been really hard to translate that into actionable information. And so being able to see some initial mock-ups, being able to go deeper than national and federal data to look at localized communities is really going to make everything that Larry just described so much more important and relevant to the individuals in our communities. I want to switch gears a little bit here and ask Bridget to reflect on this from that K-12 experience, as Walton as a foundation has really evolved into thinking about where K-12 outcomes need to be focused.
Thanks, Nicole. I mean, I think building on what Larry mentioned, I really liked how he said, transparent and clear learning pathways. That's something that we don't have for people in our higher ed system. It's also something that we don't have for people in K-12 education. And so, what we've seen through the pandemic, through students, experiencing serious learning loss, also through the use of more technology and personalized learning experiences, we know that there's a tremendous amount of data and information out there that could be used by students and families, but they're not clear on those pathways. They're not clear what will lead them to the lives that they're looking to choose for themselves. And so, at Walton, we're really interested in this idea of what is the infrastructure and tools that are needed to support families to understand, how is my student doing? And our vision is that, students can understand their own trajectory and where they're headed. And there's a long way to go for that. Right now, a lot of that information is locked up in, student information systems and proprietary systems, and it's not connected. I think I once heard Kaya Henderson, his former chancellor in DC, say that they had data, I think, and she said 20 to 30 systems in DCPS. And so imagine as a parent all the different systems that you are interacting with and trying to access to be able to find out what is going on with your kid. And so, I think the ultimate vision would be, building on these concepts of LER and digital wallets, that students have some ability to control their own data and information, to take that with them and to use that to really understand how they can continue to go in the direction that they're looking to go in.
I love that. That also resonates with an upcoming discussion later today on LERs, so stay tuned for that. We've started to get some questions in from the audience. I encourage all of you to continue to navigate to the QR code and enter your questions. This one I think is really going to resonate with Bethany here because it's focused on use cases, which is something we talked a lot about before as we prep for today. And the question is, what is the philanthropic perspective on the importance of use cases? What are the qualities of a good use case?
I also asked Nicole not to give me hard ones, but clearly she didn't get that message. So off the cuff, I would say use cases are extremely important for my philanthropy. I will say a saying we have in philanthropy is you get to know one foundation, you know one foundation. So I won't presume to talk even for the other foundations on this panel. But we're really interested in creating a better world for learners. And so when you start to talk about data, and we love that you have really technical conversations amongst yourselves, that honestly I often don't understand all of the terms that you're using, I need to be able to connect it, have a daisy chain of cause and effect that gets me from the hard infrastructure work you're doing to that improved world for learners. And so use cases is one of those intermediate steps that helps me get from that technical work that you're doing to how this might actually change our system, change our institutions, change our state agencies, that will then ultimately, hopefully, result in improved student outcomes. There was another, so use cases, critically important when you're talking to a Ascendium Education Group. What was the other part of the question, Nicole?
What are the qualities of a good one, which
Oh.
you did start to hit on a bit.
So qualities of a good one, again, off the cuff. I really want you to be specific about what kind of decision makers you're talking about. Is it federal, state policymakers? Is it SHIO, state agencies? Is it institutional leaders? Is it even faculty? Is it, as we heard from Indiana, going direct to families and students? Who is using it? The audience question that Chris put forward. And for what purpose? What kind of decisions are they facing? How might they use the information that you're producing in order to get to those better decisions, whatever they may be? So that's, I'm sure others on this panel can add to that great question, but that's my off-the-cuff response.
I will add to that great question. So for every foundation is different because we don't use cases as much, I guess. I should say the data portion. So I oversee data. We have just a data officer. That's my job all day long, every day. I have colleagues, Frank Essian, who focuses on research, and another colleague, Wendy, who focuses on evaluation. And so we're fortunate that we have a cadre of people who approach the use of data in very different ways. We help our colleagues use data, but then we also are treated like a strategy, so we have dollars to invest to advance our own agendas. It's like I'll call them an agenda. Why not? And so, for us, when we think about use cases, part of this, again, it depends on the project and where we are. I guess that's the really hard part because we don't use them that much. We see the value in them. Our state policy team does a lot of work making the case about why somebody should have an attainment goal or why it matters. From our data investment portfolio, we're really looking to try and see what's sustainable and additive. For me, how do I show up and not be disruptive to your world and support something that can continue after I leave? Because as much as I want to fund data for the rest of my life, I can't, right? And as hard, what I'll share a little bit about philanthropy I've learned being here 2 years is we have to make the case up to our bosses to get a part of our total pie of money allocated to data, right? So if we can't tell the stories through use cases or other tools, if we can't share the impact that you share with us, we have a hard time making case for our portfolios to get increased investments, which allow us to do more. So when you have a grant officer saying I need the final report or send in your interim report, and you're like, oh, it's late, I'll get it to you eventually, that actually hurts our ability to be able to advocate for more data in general. It just does. When we're on the ball, they're like, oh, they got stuff under control. Here's a larger piece of the pie. Go out and do more good things. So for us, I guess the use case is more of an internal use case of I know all of you do it and hand everything in on time, and it's wonderful. But the extent to which you hand things in on time and help us advocate internally, the more that we can use that to make a case for you.
I think that's great, Chris, to also tie it back to many of the folks here who are grant recipients. Those reports do drive our ability to easily synthesize and summarize what you're all doing, in part because, what I think is at the meta level here around different audiences is we're all excited about our 5 to 20 to 100 page papers. Our leadership is not reading that, right? So we are constantly, and as whatever you all give us, we're constantly cutting that down into something that really hits on and drives home the impact of the work. One thing I wanted to riff on from that, and similarly thinking about use cases from a different lens, is thinking about it as your research agenda, right? So we fundamentally in systems change through the way that the Gates Foundation invests, really view the start of a research and establish of a research agenda as critical. And in fact, many of you may be aware of the Education to Workforce Indicators Framework that we partnered with Mathematica to release. It tries to cull down all of the myriad indicators, measures, and metrics out in the field that you could measure across the ed to workforce continuum, and tries to distill that down to 20 critical questions that we think each state should be asking and answering. And so appreciate all the work of the teams that have done that. Mathematica has a website on it. But if you're really trying to find out what the use cases are or what questions to ask and answer, we found the research for that report to be incredible. We worked with community-based organizations, state agencies. So to some of the points of my colleagues here, it's also not just about the policymakers, right? It's about practitioners and others that are closer to the communities we seek to serve. And in fact, those communities themselves that help us to generate those types of questions and make sure the data is aligned. So shameless plug. Does anyone else want to reflect a little bit on the use case question?
Yeah, I was just going to say brief. I appreciate very much, Nicole, the comments made before. From our perspective, we think of it as absolutely essential to make the case to those that need to take action to make these use cases possible. So I'm especially thinking about state policymakers when I think about UI wage records modernization. I'm also thinking about the possibility of making the case for non-degree credential issuers to submit their data in order to get outcomes, quality outcomes data for those folks as well. The more that we can make the use cases really vivid and clear to them, and by the way, also I think partly by doing that, to make it clear to business. I personally think that the silver bullet, there's not a lot of silver bullets in our work, but I do think the silver bullet on getting those additional fields added to the wage records is getting the state chambers of commerce to endorse that as important to their economic competitiveness and the workforce efforts and employment needs of their members. And I think we can do that.
I love that. And that'll resonate with folks here this morning about Robert's comments around how do we encourage businesses and private industry to give up some of the, or share, maybe I shouldn't use give up, to share some of the data that they have so that we're reducing that duplication of effort and also in some cases reducing the inaccuracy of it. And one of the things that Robert said was trying to think sector-wide, because when we make individual tools that a single private entity benefits from, we're going to start to see, the walls come up, right, around those proprietary opportunities, which is another place that I think Coleridge can go as a public good and a resource to try and generate those shared outcomes and that shared work. It makes me also think of Opportunity Insights and the work they did early in the COVID pandemic to encourage credit card issuers to share some of their individual spending data so that we could understand at a national level how spending behavior was adjusting and shifting during the pandemic. So Larry jump on in.
Yeah, I'll jump in. And Stephen, I agree with everything that you just said, and I do think that it's important, especially when you think about business, to show efficiency and gains. What is the business outcome? How is this going to benefit employers? And when you talk, so if you all talk to myself or my team, we're looking at things from two folds, right? We believe in what we call shared value at Walmart. So we believe in doing things and making investments that benefit both business and society. So I'm looking at it through two lenses. And when we think about how we're going to act or create disruption within current business operating practices, right? When I'm talking to the business counterparts, I need to show value gained and minimal disruption, or that there's value creation that makes the risk of that disruption worth it. And so when you have those use cases and you can show those efficiencies and show the gains and show the value added, like that's very, very important, for us at Walmart, and I'm sure for others. But like my colleagues, I won't speak for them, but at Walmart, it certainly is critical.
So we have another question here from the audience, and I think I'm not going to start with Bethany, but I think she'll be amused because I think I gave you the softball. So we'll see who wants to jump in on this one first. So the question is, and my colleagues will appreciate this, how can philanthropy better align? Often in states, we get initiative fatigue, where the same people are tapped for multiple committees or initiatives that are similar. It turns into a competition of differentiating a project when really it's quite similar to what another funder is funding. I'm so happy to be the moderator, y'all. So who wants to jump in? Bridget? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. And, I do think it's important for funders. I mean, one of the reasons actually that we're really interested in working with other funders here is because we don't want to be the only ones pushing you to do some really specific thing. And I think secondly, and I know it's really hard for grantees to do this, but I think you should push back on us when we are asking you to do something that you think is maybe not in your lane or too specific or duplicative of work that you've done before. I think funders need to be pushed to be more collaborative, and we're certainly trying to do that. We're part of several different funder collaboratives, social capital, economic mobility, data. We're looking at ways that we can work together and try to, to find ways to not be duplicative and actually to push forward the work of the field and build on the momentum of the field. And I think, something I always try to say to grantees is like, if you don't think this is the right thing to be doing, like, don't put this in the metrics. Don't put this in the grant. Like, this is not, like, we should not be pushing you to do something that is not the way that you think the work should be done. And you're closer to the work. And so we need to look to you to understand what is the right pathway. And we might push you. We might ask a lot of questions about how it works. And we definitely do. But ultimately, as the people who are on the ground doing the work, you need to let us know what's working, what's not working. That's why we want those reports, is so we can understand what's working and what's not working, and try to do it in a way that's going to drive the impact that we're looking to see. And I think ultimately we have shared goals, and the more that we can align our investments behind those shared goals, and I think you hear a lot of commonality on this panel, the stronger the work is going to be.
Stephen?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on this. I think one, many of us in this room have worked for organizations where we had to, raise funds from third parties. And whenever you're in that kind of, say, nonprofit situation, there's always this tension between doing really good work and needing to be perceived as doing really good work. All of us, every organization up here that's a funder, right, we really don't have that tension. And therefore, we should be really careful to avoid that inclination to sort of try to say, for example, well, like, this is sort of Strata's vision per se. So one of the things that we're really trying to bring to this, I would say, just two big points I would make. One, we're going to do our best to bring a certain amount of humility to this work and say, hey, if we can find other folks that have generally shared principles, generally shared goals, the more that we can align, the more impact, that we're going to make. And really, who cares who gets the credit for that? Because we're self-funded, right? We shouldn't be worried about that, right? The other thought is, I have seen, and I'm sort of newer to this work in this context, but what I have seen is, I think it's fair to say, and feel free to push back if you guys disagree, but I think most of the funders that I'm aware of actually get kind of excited when there's other funders in the same opportunity. And so I actually think a lot of the opportunity we may see in this space is when we can get multiple organizations kind of pushing together in the same direction, which I'm sure could also make it a lot easier for the people being funded, that you're not reporting different metrics to a bunch of different groups. Certainly that's going to be the approach that we try to bring to the work.
I'll second that, Steve. Steve and I just met in person, but we have an example of one of those efforts right now. I think a couple of other colleagues are in that as well. You all will know more what I'm talking about in the not too far distant future. But for us, I think one of the things that we really push at Walmart and the Walmart Foundation is collaboration. Really trying to leverage partnerships. We don't like to do forced partnerships. We try to bring people together, bring our partners together. We have a retail opportunity network that brings all of our grantees together. We invest in putting things together so that they can see what each other is doing and look for ways to collaborate. I think just inherently, right, it's the funders and the organizations, the dynamic there with practitioners who are on the ground. And when I meet with folks, I'm constantly asking, hey, what are you all seeing? This is our strategy, very transparent with our strategy. What are you all seeing? What are your thoughts there? What can we do? This is a hypothesis. These are questions that we're trying to ask and get answers to. Are these the right questions? What questions should we have in there? And I think one of the things that we really try to work on is having the power dynamic removed, and so that we can actually have genuine questions. So it's not you reading what you think I want to hear. It's no, I really do. What do you think? And I really want to hear your thoughts on this happening. The other thing too is that we only know but so much. I know in most cases, or my team knows in most cases, some of the other funders that our partners are working with, but we don't always know. And it would be great to get more feedback around, hey, you know, we're working with this other organization who is doing this. Because just like, you know, you all are raising funds, we don't have infinite funds. We have to be good stewards of the funds that we're given to by our leadership. And so it's also helpful to be able to say, yeah, we contributed some funds that went on top of funds that are already invested, but to go back and say we're getting so much more bang for the buck because this partnership is already there. Or if there's an opportunity where we're just slightly outside of the scope of that work, but there's supplemental work that we can do that's within our scope, we're very open to that. And so it really is about, I think us working together continuously to open up the aperture on our end, to show the partnerships that we have. I think we're making progress there, but I think also on the recipient side to say, these are some of the things that we're doing and some of the other things that we're working with to open up the aperture on the recipient side and look for opportunities for us to collaborate with funders as well.
Yeah, just two part. One's procedural to help you understand kind of like why we're in the situation we are, because everything happens for a reason, and so I'll just share that. But on the other side, like we look for ways to collaborate, and knowing what each other does helps. Like if you're going to focus on the SOC code, that's awesome. I don't have to, but I can partner with you on the grant, and I can ask for something else out of it. You know what I mean? Like that's how we think. It's like he needs that one.
That's how
I
Chris
need this one. It is because I want to go back and say like this is what we did. This is our contribution. That's their contribution. We all win. Let's keep on going. Because I'm all about getting more resources to you. That's my job, right? My job is to get more money into the field to advance our data infrastructure. Process-wise, all of our foundations work on different times for our budgets. Some are 1 year, some are 2 year. So it's like you show up on December 5th, like this is how much money you have for the next year, go. And you're like, whoa, you know what I mean? So it limits our ability to cooperate sometimes because you've got to get the money out the door to have an impact, to have a report come in advance of the next funding cycle come, right? That's why I say like reports in the process is really important. So we try and collaborate as much as possible. We're on panels together. We're in different funder collaborative groups. We talk, like we do as much as we can. But to reiterate what my panelists have said, like share with us, say like, hey, I'm also working with somebody else on this part of it, because we'll pick up the phone and call each other. I mean, I have a couple of phone calls coming in the next 2 weeks with some individuals about different things that they're funding and how can we work together and show up. I think we can be disruptive by supporting your work and letting you do the good work rather than disrupting your lives, right? Like how do we empower you to be the disruptors rather than be the disruptor myself? That's kind of the frame and the way I try and enter the conversations.
Yeah, and I think that's borne out by earlier today seeing the challenge projects, right? A set of us as funders aligned on a higher level outcome and vision. And because individual projects are more difficult for us to get approvals for, it was easier to come with a shared impact at the challenge level. So I would encourage all of you to think more expansively about partnership on your end as well. I think sometimes paradoxically, grantees feel that competitive spirit because they think they'll get less funding, but actually, if you tell us about an integrated project, you may get more because it's going to have a bigger impact than the one-off pilot that you initially had. So I think it goes both ways about where these initiatives or where the incentives and behavioral change is needed in the field. We have a few more questions that came in here, some meaty ones again. Did you have a preference? Oh, great. Awesome. I'd been guessing, and apparently that was accurate. Okay. This next one is focused on skills-based hiring, which we heard a lot about on the panel a little bit earlier. Has the move towards skills-based hiring changed foundation conversations about funding for higher ed and workforce development funding?
Well, we'll tag team on this because we're both in this. I just left a non-degree credential research network, and I was on a panel with LinkedIn and some other people talking about this issue. I think that there's some some open questions about skills-based hiring. So has it changed the way we think about things? A little bit, but not necessarily. Again, as a foundation, our goal is to increase educational attainment because we think that provides people an opportunity and path forward. And we put an earnings premium on credentials because we don't want to count every single thing that everybody earns because we want there to be some kind of economic return. That's just, we think you should earn more than somebody with a high school diploma. I think that's a fair assumption. And so there's just some open questions and cognitive itches, if you will, for me about the space. As somebody who's supportive of it, you hear a lot about skills-based hiring, but it's for entry-level jobs, largely. And if research shows that like only less than 10%, about 5% of students who started like a non-credit pathway ever transferred to credit-bearing coursework, are we setting up a situation that's driven by, you know, technology companies and companies that are doing a lot of this work? Caveat, we invested in Credly and helped them stand up, right? But are we creating a condition where we're creating an alternative path and there's really no way to move to up within an organization? And so we're really keen and sensitive on, or at least I am, is what's being proposed actually not going to be a roadblock and a path to a segregated society of workers or not? Because we have a strong commitment to racial justice and equity at Lumina Foundation. It leads with everything we do, and that's how I enter the space and conversation around it. I'm excited about it, but I'm also very cautious about being just on skills-based hiring.
Stephen, what's your take? Are we seeing different behavior in the field from foundations?
I don't know about foundations, but I do. First of all, I agree with Chris's points. I would add, I do think that, you know, one of the challenges I think we've had as we think about higher educational attainment in the U.S. is that while it absolutely is good on average and good for the country overall, we are running into a little bit of a problem that we have more college graduates than we have good college-level jobs. And this is I think almost in some ways maybe becoming the bigger part of the problem possibly, in that we can help millions of people to get to a better place through making all this alignment work better. But there's tens of millions actually. So we can help several million, I think, through the stuff we normally focus on, but then there's still tens of millions left that we're gonna have to really give some more thought to. The other thing I would say about skills-based hiring, and maybe this is obvious to folks, but it occurred to me that we really need to think about this maybe in a couple different ways. It's one thing to say, like, we're big supporters of opportunity at work, and we think that the notion of saying, hey, let's be careful not to over-credentialize jobs when you're just using it as a filter, because you're going to get a less diverse talent pool. You're also actually, as an employer, going to get more turnover as well if you do it that way. That's sort of one dimension of skills-based hiring. There's this whole other idea that Larry was kind of touching on earlier, which is also legitimate, but kind of a more sophisticated thing, which is this notion of actually aligning, you know, a particular basket of skills with a particular occupation. I think the first thing about being careful to over-credentialize jobs, I think that's a huge thing we should be focused on right now. I think the second thing is also a big opportunity, but we don't yet have the systems and the sophistication of, you know, data and understanding, I think, to be able to execute it well, but it's absolutely where, you know, where the world is going.
I'm gonna switch to a new question because we only have about 6 minutes left. I did warn everyone they may not answer each one, so we'll put a pin in that. I want to touch on one or two more questions here. This one is focused on evaluation, so Bethany, hopefully, hopefully you can answer this as our expert on the panel. Are your organizations also funding evaluations of the programs and tools you are supporting to determine whether they are actually effective? I hope so.
I can just say yes. And maybe I'll just say a word about my team at Ascendium. So part of our portfolio is actually just investing in evaluations that are tied to our programmatic grant making. So if you find us investing in something that you're developing and you want to have an evaluation, we can build that into the particular grant, or we could fund it separately. But yes, we definitely want to understand to what extent are the tools, the reforms, the innovations you're creating actually making the difference that you hoped when you were originally creating them. Happy to go more in depth if somebody wants to corner me about evaluation issues.
We've got another question here that ties back a bit to our capacity building discussion and is focused on enhanced UI wage records. So I know there's a lot of interest on the panel about this. How can philanthropy support the transition that employers would need to make, both tech and process, to collect and submit an enhanced UI wage record? There could be a tome or a 40-minute discussion in our Who wants to jump in?
I would say sort of two things. I think one, we need to build a really clear, simple, and compelling case with several practical applications for how this will benefit employers. in their own self-interest. I think the second piece, and I think the U.S. Chamber Foundation is doing a lot of great work on this, is just helping them leverage the tools that they're already using, like Workday and ADP and so forth, to be able to submit that information. If you put those two things together, I think most of the answer is there.
Larry, yeah.
I agree with that. I think keeping it simple, really moving towards reinforcing the business cases and having alignment on the business cases. And then secondly, looking at quality assessment frameworks for vendors. Because right now, you're getting swamped with vendor recommendations and requests and pitches, and the same thing that we look at in terms of learning paths with consumer protections around credentialing is the same thing that employers are facing with vendors in this space. So those will be the two things I would throw in.
All right, looks like we do have time for this last question. I said that last time, so we'll see how much time it takes people to answer. This one's focused on what we touched on with digital wallets and LERs in particular. And I find it interesting. Can you say more about the practical utility of LERs? We often say they're necessary, but it's difficult to paint the vision to policymakers as to how learners, workers, and parents will actually use them.
I'll jump in here because if you all know Sean Murphy, he would.
I know.
Sean be like,
would
Larry,
already have his, like-
how did you get up here and not talk about this, Larry? This was the one thing I asked you to talk about. As as representing Walmart, the largest employer in the world, really, the thing is simple. It really is. It's we need individuals to be able to show and communicate and manage the skills that they have. And that's where this ultimately is about. That's why we're investing heavily in LERs, and we are a big believer in it, because if we get this right, employers will have the jobs that are available. They'll switch to a skills-based approach and say, these are the skills we need, and it doesn't take someone to be sophisticated to translate organizational languages or sector languages. They can simply say, hey, I have these skills, and the bias that's removed from language and communication and all of these other things, that's out of the picture. And it's just, I have these skills. And for employers, there are so many opportunity costs with not putting the right people in the right positions at the right time, and that can be eliminated if we have a fair system in which people can demonstrate and confidently show the skills that they have and confidently go after the jobs that they have the skills for. And that's why we think this meeting is very, very critical.
I see a lot of nods. Anybody else want to dip their toe into that one? I mean, I'll just say that from some of the other things we've discussed on the panel, we're often thinking about the audience or who we're building things for. And while Larry was touching on the employers, we also think that learners and workers have more flexibility if they're able to essentially carry around their information, their knowledge, skills, and abilities in their wallet. I mean, I think what often challenges folks on the utility here is you forget you already have things like this. The typical analogy is that your credit card is in your Apple Wallet and you walk around with it whether you have your credit card on you or not. That's the theory here, right? Now, underneath it is a significant amount of infrastructure. And Larry touched on that in terms of we have to get skills-based hiring to be taken up. We are seeing that. For many of you who live in the DMV, Maryland, right, has removed the requirement of education specifically from their public employee staffing and hiring. The more that we see those sorts of structural changes in the way that large employers choose and select workers, the bigger we're going to see this sort of LER or digital wallet opportunity become effective in the field. So that's my soapbox. We are coming up on time. Thank you all so much. I think we didn't get to one or two questions, and so we'll follow up with the Coleridge team. I'd like to thank the panel here of great partners in philanthropy, and we're here to help whenever you need us.